Business, and we say hello to Kemi Knight.
Hi, Francois.
Cuba, which has been hit with a double whammy, heavy rains, Hurricane Oscar's passing through, and 4 days of a blackout. There is a little bit of good news on that front, though.
That's right. The government says that about 50% of electricity is back on in Havana, and that it should be restored to most of the country by the end of the day. But of course, this won't solve a crisis that's been years in the making. The Prime Minister has blamed the problem on deteriorating infrastructure and fuel shortages, which have been exacerbated by Hurricane Milton and now Tropical Storm Oscar. The country produces very little fuel of its own, meaning it relies heavily on fuel deliveries to power its plants. Liza Kamenov has more.
After days of total darkness, Cuba has restored up to 50% of electricity in its capital as authorities work on getting the rest of the country back on its feet. The communist island of over 11 million people has called on help from Colombia, Mexico and Russia, blaming its electricity problem on a drop in fuel imports from neighbours like Venezuela. This was exacerbated by extreme weather as Tropical Storm Oscar hit the island.
Our experience is that whenever there's a meteorological event like this, the first impact is always on the electrical systems. Downed power lines, poles, transformers, insulators, which weaken the system even more and make it necessary to shut down the generation units that are online.
But the failure of the Antonio Guterres plant on Friday was just the final straw. It's the latest in a long series of outages, some lasting up to 20 hours a day, as degrading power plant facilities remain in urgent need of restoration and the country's national energy shortfall hovers at 30%. This comes against the backdrop of the island's harshest economic crisis in 3 decades. Cuba's economy began sinking during the pandemic, which shook the tourism sector and sent inflation surging. It took a second blow when former President Donald Trump tightened the 6-decade-long US trade embargo on Cuba, under which the country already struggled to import fuel and food. In a country where the average monthly wage is the equivalent of 37 euros, many Cubans can't make ends meet and have no choice but to flee. Authorities have now forced non-essential businesses to shut down because of the power outages, paralyzing an already struggling economy.
The AI boom has caused a surge in electricity demand, and in Taiwan, atomic energy could soon be making a comeback as a result. Taiwanese Premier Cho Jong-tai says the island's leaders are considering adopting the latest nuclear energy technology to meet the needs of a particularly power-hungry artificial intelligence industry, chip making in particular. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, for example, produces 90% of the world's most advanced computer chips and uses 9% of the country's electricity, with that expected to balloon as the technology progresses. For now, Taiwan depends heavily on imported fuel sources, which represent 89% of its electricity generation. It can barely keep up with current demand and is failing to meet its ambitious clean energy targets. Turning to nuclear would be a major shift for Taiwan, where public support for nuclear reactors tanked in 2011 after an earthquake wrecked the Fukushima plant in neighbouring Japan. Victims of the 2015 Mariana Dam collapse took their case to a UK court this Monday. The civil trial is aiming to determine whether mining giant BHP is liable for one of Brazil's worst environmental disasters. In November 2015, a dam used to store waste from iron ore mining burst in the state of Minas Gerais. 19 people were killed and more than 40 million cubic meters of toxic waste were released, polluting 675 kilometers of rivers. It left 800 hectares of Atlantic forest degraded and 11 tons of dead fish. The lawsuit is seeking about £36 billion in damages from the global mining giant, making it the largest environmental payout ever. Earlier today, France 24 spoke to the CEO of the law firm representing the claimants. He says it's not about the money for them, it's about accountability. Take a listen.
The 620,000 people we're representing, they are people whose lives in one way or another revolved around this river, which has been destroyed. So they were people, some of whom lived in very, very close proximity to the dam and were family members of those who sadly died. all the way to thousands and tens of thousands of people who acted as fisher folk who would get their daily sustenance, or they would commercially fish in the river, to hundreds of thousands of people who lived in cities alongside the river who were unable to access clean drinking water as a result of the water pollution.
Expected to last about 12 weeks.
Many thanks. We'll be following that trial. Kemi Knight, we'll be back later with more business news. It's